welcome to the summit. For anybody that doesn't know you and isn't familiar with your work, could you just tell us a bit about your background and how you currently got into the work that you're doing?
So in the first place, thank you very much for this invitation, because I'm always very passionate about Weekend University and sharing some of my experiences in my job and my background indeed. So I'm a psychologist and a philosopher, and I work at Metanoia Institute as a researcher, and I also work at the New School for Psychotherapy and Counselling. But these are just all my formal titles and things. What I've been really working on a lot is research on meaning in life, and particularly how can we cope with difficult life circumstances such as COVID-19 or cancer or unemployment, and how can we still live a meaningful life. So yeah, that's a bit of my background.
Fantastic. Now, so we're in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis right now, and you've been doing a lot of research into this area.
Yeah.
And you're actually writing a book on it at the minute as well. So I'd be curious to ask you, what are your thoughts on how COVID is affecting us, but also how can people live a meaningful life despite the situation we're currently in?
Yeah, so one of the things that I've seen is that COVID-19 has impacted a lot of our lives. So in the general population, approximately 1 in 3 people, they find it actually quite hard psychologically to deal with the full lockdown and all the impact. But also when we then look at medical doctors, nurses, and other people at the front line, they seem to be really struggling. So like 1 in 2 of them are really struggling psychologically. And why are we struggling with it? I think there are several reasons for that. Obviously, a lot of people, they are very much afraid, which is very understandable. Like there's something quite serious going on in the world, and that it can be potentially threatening to our lives and of our loved ones. But also on a more daily life level, a lot has changed, particularly when people have had to stay at home for a long time. A lot of work has gone totally online, or actually several millions of people have already lost their jobs in the UK. So there's a lot of specific changes in their daily lives because we're not going outdoors so much anymore. So there are just a lot of things that were important in the past. We are not able to achieve them possibly at this moment. They may come back, but not at this moment. So what's actually happening there is that we need to find new ways to live a meaningful life, with all those limitations. And that's not always that easy to do, to suddenly reinvent yourself. So the thing is, there have been a lot of those memes on social media where people have been saying that we must use this period to really get more self inside, becoming a better person, etc. Of course, that would be great, but quite often it's already quite a challenge to be grieving, have a kind of bereavement over the loss of what was meaningful in the past. And quite often it's just a sense of disorientation, because a lot of the stuff that made sense, suddenly they don't make sense anymore. Or also how we feel in society, like society has changed, how we relate to each other have changed. People may feel a little bit unsafe, or they don't know how can we trust the government. Is the government there always as a safety net, or will, for instance, NHS be crumbling? So it is very much for people that they need to find some new ways to find out how can I rebuild a meaningful life and reconnect with what's meaningful. But that's also actually, this time gives us the opportunity, almost like a reset button, that we can have a reflection for our personal life, but also for us as society, about how can we actually make that change and what is really important, what really matters to us.
That's really interesting. So I think a good place to start, Joel, would just be to ask, what's your definition of meaning? Because you've done loads of research into this area. So how do you define it? Yeah,
so the thing is, actually, the more research I do on it, the less clear I am about it in my explanations or in a theoretical sense. Because meaning in life is, in the first place, it's lived, it's experienced, it's intuitive. So a lot of people, they have all those big theories and explanations, they have all those nice formulas. But quite often that's not really meaningful, because that's a theory about meaning, but not necessarily really meaningful. So what I would say, what meaning in life is about, it's a sense about, how can we live life to its fullest? And that can be even like in a small moments in life. Like the example that I always give is like if you go to a park and you listen to a bird and you enjoy the bird, that connection with nature, that is already meaningful. And it's not only all those big things that people often think about, about like my marriage, graduation. Yes, of course, these are very meaningful moments. But if your life is only meaningful at those, 10 big moments in your life, then I really feel a pity for you. So it's more about all those small moments in the daily lives that makes our life worth living. And these are those tiny things. And for instance, like going to the weekend university or having a good chat with you, for example.
That's really interesting. In one of your talks, you said, it's about having this mindset to life where you're noticing things, and certain small things throughout your day can just be meaningful. It doesn't have to be these big, grand events. I think that's such a powerful way to approach life. But Joel, do you think that we can make meaning, or is it something that we have to uncover?
Yeah, so I always have kind of an allergy against the formulation of making meaning or controlling meaning. Possibly for some people it works that way, but I really wonder whether that can be truly meaningful, because that's often when we say about I make meaning. For instance, like I go to the bookstore and I buy a book about how to live a meaningful life in 7 steps. Do this, this, and this, and then your life is perfect. Well, quite rarely that is really what it is about, because it's much more that intuitive sense, like what I was speaking about. So I often compare this with unpeeling any type of fruit. So imagine that you have like a mango. Because the thing is, like a mango, you have the very hard big core. There are all those layers of flesh around it. And that's also with meaning in life, because we hear a lot of expectations from our parents, a lot of expectations from our culture, society. And we think possibly also that we need to have success in a job or in our education or in whatever it is. We need to have a big house, etc. Those social expectations. But these are all those layers almost that are on top of what can be really meaningful for us. So what finding out what's meaningful in our lives, that's almost like unpeeling and getting rid of all the outer layers of like a piece of fruit, like a mango. And then we come deeper and deeper and deeper. And then at a certain sense, we feel like, okay, this is actually much more authentic than what I thought was meaningful. And it's very much about that. It's about learning to feel what is authentically meaningful and what is not so authentically meaningful.
That's really interesting. Now, I can see behind you that you've got your book, Meaning in Life, an evidence-based handbook for practitioners. Yeah. And I notice on the front of the book, you've got a sailing boat. And could you maybe tell us about the metaphor of sailing in meaning and why you've used that on the front cover of your book?
Absolutely, yeah. So that is, I've used the metaphor of sailing quite often to describe meaning in life, because sailing, you cannot say that sailing is only about a boat, or sailing is only about going to a destination. No, when we speak about sailing, it's about a totality. So that's also about living a meaningful life. It's about the totality. It's like a package deal. You cannot get only one aspect of it. No, it's all those other things are integrated. So like some people, they say, well, meaning in life is having a specific goal or a specific purpose. Well, yes, that can be one aspect of it, but there's much more to it. It's similar like to sailing. With sailing, having a lighthouse that you go towards like a destination, like sailing is much more than that lighthouse. But quite often when people talk about meaning, they only focus on those lighthouses, whereas actually quite often what people do in their lives is that they just put some temporary goals, and they can say, well, I've now been sailing towards that lighthouse now for a while, but let's now go to another point at the horizon. So that is one of the aspects of meaning in life, is that it's about having lighthouses, those goals at the horizon where we go to. But it's also about values. So, for instance, with sailing, it involves a lot of values, because are you gonna use your motor, for instance, or are you gonna say, well, if I use my motor when I'm sailing, that's actually cheating. I don't want that. So I really want to only use the sail and the wind. I won't use a motor. So that's about values. Similarly in life, we have values. And also when you sail, it can be quite handy to know more or less where you are, to be able to navigate, to have like a map, an understanding of your surroundings. That's very similar also to living a meaningful life. It's also being aware of what's going on in a society, knowing what the opportunities are, what the limitations are, what the influences from other people on us are. So I think that that's also important. Another aspect to sailing is also that we need to feel worthy. We need to have a sense of self-worth, because I need to say like, yeah, I'm worth it to really follow my own route when I'm going to sail. I'm worth it to really get my sailboat out of the storage and go on the water. I'm worth it. Similarly, it's about meaning in life. It's important that we feel that we're worthy to actually follow what's meaningful to me, and not what someone else has imposed on me, or what society is expecting. No, I'm worth it to listen to myself, to take my intuition serious about what's meaning in life really about it. And then the two last aspects of sailing is also about having the ability to cope with any storms and still continue sailing. And these are, those existential skills, to use a big word, these skills about, being able to live a meaningful life despite having lost a job, despite of a lockdown, despite of COVID-19, despite of an economic crisis. I'm still able to sail through life and have a meaningful life. And then actually the last point is, sailing is not about sitting at the shore and not doing it. No, it's actually doing it. And that's quite often that when I, for instance, get clients in my own clinic, that I quite often are very good at theorizing about it. And sometimes they have all the ingredients of sailing perfectly ready, but they actually are not doing it. And it's sometimes that's just that jump, just do it. Sometimes I feel like, just do anything, just go, that commitment and really doing it. And that's the last bit. So it's all those different aspects, that totality, that makes your life meaningful, in a very similar way as sailing, where sailing includes all those different elements. And you cannot say it's only this or that. No, it's the combination of all those aspects if we want to live a meaningful life.
I think it's such a powerful metaphor, and just something else to add on top of that. I don't know if you ever thought about this before, but Alan Watts, the philosopher, used to have this thing. He would say that he would talk about a ship, and he would leave the wreck would be left behind the ship, and he would always say that the wreck doesn't drive the ship; it doesn't dictate the direction of the ship. And he was basically saying that you can change the direction of your life accordingly. So it's maybe not as relevant, but I was reminded of it there now.
No, absolutely, yeah.
But what I'd love to ask you about now, Joel, is, why is meaning in life so important for people? What are the benefits of living a meaningful life, psychologically, physically? What have you found through your research in that area?
Yeah. So what we really see is that a lot of people, they really crave for meaning. So there is the psychiatrist and philosopher Viktor Frankl. He was saying that people have a will to meaning. And I've always been quite skeptical about any big terms. But I think that he may have a point there, because everyone who I know, they need something to have a reason to live for. Like, why are we going? Why are we sailing through life? Why are we living? Like, each of us needs to have a sense of that. It's like having a motivation to really move and go through life. And so a lot of research is actually showing that when people are able to live a meaningful life, when they have that sense, that they actually experience a much better mental health. and even their physical health is better, like a better blood pressure, lower risk for like cardiovascular disease, etc. Whereas even like in some of the studies that I've done, I see that for cardiovascular disease, it's like, whereas people may take some medication to reduce their CVD risks, but actually like living a meaningful life may be equally powerful. I'm not saying not to use the medication, but like it is that powerful. It can have such big effects on our mental and physical well-being.
Really interesting. So I'm curious as well. They say in psychology, Joel, that research is me search. And is this true for you as well with meaning? And I'd be curious, what sparked your initial curiosity in this subject?
Well, the thing is, I think it's a topic that I've always been looking at. Like even as a small kid, I've always been asking the big questions. Like I was almost born a philosopher, I dare to say. Like, so when I sometimes meet some people from my primary school and I'm telling that is my expertise now, they're like, yeah, I already knew that you were going to do something like that. So, those existential questions have always been there for me. Even as a kid, I've always been asking those questions, but also that I have been seeing like how important it is to really drive people and society. And and particularly also I've seen the strengths also in my own life, how important it is to actually have that sense of meaning, particularly in difficult moments in your life. So, for instance, when I was writing that same book about meaning in life, I was actually hit by a taxi, and that's also how I start my book. And so I needed like surgery, etc., long route of recovery. But what actually really helped me in the end out of the situation was very much the sense of what's meaningful. And for me, that was writing that book. So writing that book helped me to get through that difficult period. And so I've seen it for myself and also for a lot of my clients, countless numbers of people, how important it is to find a sense of meaning, because that will give you the strength, the power and the motivation to get through those difficult periods in life.
Interesting. Now, you talk about 5 different categories or types of meaning. Could you maybe take us through these 5 different categories and why they're important?
Yeah, of course. So what I did is, also as being a researcher, I really want to know, like, how do people experience meaning in life all over the world? So what I did is that I did like a big literature review of all the scientific research in which people were asked what's meaningful, important, or valuable for you in life. I found 107 studies in over 45,000 people. And all the answers from all the studies, I have summarized that in those 5 categories. Then I've actually created that into a new questionnaire. And the new questionnaire I've also then tried out. However, from there, I found out that there are 6 categories and not 5. So that's my current development since my new empirical study, that I can now say there's 6 categories. And this is kind of now like a universal sextet of meaning in life. So these are different types of meaning that people can find. So the first one is about materialistic types of meaning in life. So that's about, everything material. So having like a big salary, having a nice house, but also it's about, like, for instance, also success in your career. So it's very much like anything that's quite visible and material. Then there's the new category, which was in the past part of the materialistic category, but that's more about the hedonistic and the physical experiences. So that's about enjoying life, having fun, but also our body experience, sports, sex, anything that's in that category. Then the third type of meaning, it's about self-oriented types of meaning. So that's about self-care, that's about self-development, authenticity, so very much about the self. Then the fourth category, that's about social types of meaning, and that's very much about feeling connected with others, family, having children, being part of a wider tradition and culture, but also helping others, altruism. Then there are also some larger types of meanings, and those larger types, they are very much about those specific unique purposes that individuals may experience in their life. Or that could be about religion, about ethics, about like political activism, can be about religion, spirituality, a connection with the past and the future. And then the last category is a more abstract category. That's more like the existential, philosophical types of meaning that people can experience in like even each circumstance. And that's very much about the fact that I'm breathing. That's already meaningful in itself. The fact that I am here, that I'm alive, that's already meaningful. I don't need to do anything to be meaningful and valuable. So that's very much about sense of inherent meaningfulness, of freedom, responsibility, uniqueness, connectedness, but on a very abstract level. So these are the 6 types of meaning in life that you can actually see in almost all countries, although of course different cultures have different focus points there.
That's fascinating. Now, are there any differences in the effects, the psychological effects that these different types of meaning have on us? Like say one culture is particularly focused on hedonistic and self-focused meanings, whereas another culture might be more focused on spiritual and social types of meaning. Is there a difference there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've actually recently published a book that's called The Economics of Meaning in Life. And in that book, I have actually connected research on meaning in life with more nationalistic characteristics. And what I found out there is that the more capitalistic a country is, the more people focus on materialistic, self-oriented, or hedonistic types of meaning. Whereas countries that are less focused on like a capitalistic perspective on life, they actually focus more on the social or the larger types of meaning. And we also know in general within countries, but also between countries, that people are much happier when they focus on social or larger types of meaning. So therefore, we also see that in a lot of Western countries that there's a big mental health crisis. And I'm explaining the mental health crisis as the result from our focus on materialistic, self-oriented, and hedonistic types of meanings. And I've traveled a lot, and you can see some international sculptures and paintings behind me, which is reflective of a lot of my journeys all over the world. And I really have learned how people in different cultures can experience meaning in life in such a different way, and how that can have such a different impact on people's lives.
That's super interesting, Joel. Now I want to move on to, so you've developed something called, I don't know if you're the main developer, but you have basically taken the best of all the meaning-centered therapies and developed your own meaning-centered therapy. I would just be curious to ask, how does this actually work? When someone comes to work with you, how do you approach helping that person?
Yeah, so I'm absolutely not the first one who came up with helping people to find meaning in life in a professional way, because I would say clergy, so priests, etc., and philosophers, they have possibly already been doing that for thousands of years. So yeah, I'm just the latest person in that sense. But there was also some therapists and psychiatrists like Viktor Frankl, who I've mentioned before, who put it much more on the map, who was saying, yeah, we can also combine it like with psychology and psychotherapy. And as psychotherapists, we can help people to live a meaningful life. And so what I've done indeed is that I've been looking at all the different therapies that help people to live a meaningful life, and I've been just stealing the best ideas, and I've been building on their research evidence. I've been building on what do we know, what works, and on the basis of that, I've more or less developed this treatment to help people find or experience meaning in life. And yeah, so the aim of this treatment of what I call meaning-centered therapies, it focuses very much on, its direct aim is to help people live a more meaningful and satisfying life while acknowledging life's challenges. So it's always about the duality, because it's not an either or. It's not saying like, okay, we're going to replace your daily life struggle with a sense of meaning, because if when you've discovered what's your meaning in life, then you have no problems anymore. Obviously, it doesn't work that way. So it's more that we are aware of, despite of the difficult life circumstances that I may be in, how can I still live a meaningful and satisfying life? And the way how I help people to develop those skills, that is by actually systematically exploring those different types of meaning in life that I've just mentioned. So we have one session for each different type of meaning in life, and we just explore that in a systematic way. And I invite people to reflect on it, like, to which extent is that something that you can find meaning in? How does it feel for you? And is it truly meaningful, or is that something that was imposed on you by your parents or by your culture? But is it authentically meaningful? So what I will be doing very much there is to help people connect with a critical intuition about what's truly meaningful for them. And and I personally really like to work in like group settings, like in like group workshops, group training, group psychotherapy, because I believe in the power of people helping each other. And because we're all in it together, all of us need to make sense of this weird world and this weird life, and all of us are dealing with all those issues. And in that sense, being together and sharing ideas that can really inspire.
I totally agree. Something you talk about as well in some of your lectures at the Weekend University is how phenomenology can be used to help uncover more meaning in life. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that there?
Oh, yes, I can. So actually, I should not have explained the metaphor of the piece of fruit before. I should have waited with that. I knew. Because usually that's how I explain phenomenology. Because phenomenology is very much about unpeeling our sense of meaning in life, and really getting more to deeper core, to a deeper level. So it is very much a critical intuition, and there's two aspects to it. It's critical and it's intuitive. And the critical bit, that means that we are going to get rid of all the superficial layers that we know are not truly authentically meaningful, because these are the expectations from our parents. It's expectation from a society. This is just what I thought in the past was meaningful, but possibly it has changed. So it's very much about analyzing and like just checking for ourselves. Okay, how does this feel? For instance, let's say, let's try to find an example from my past. For instance, as a child, I really liked to play, for instance, with a kite. That was quite meaningful for me. But when I now check in my intuition, like, it's how meaningful is now having a kite and running around with a kite now for me. At this moment, not so much as in the past. Yeah, so what I do there is that I use my intuition. I ask myself that question in a critical way, like, how meaningful does it actually feel? And is it more or less meaningful than other activities in my life? And so that's what phenomenology is very much about. It's about its critical intuition, listening to our intuition, getting rid of, or actually making a distinction between what's more authentically meaningful and what's less authentically meaningful. And so it's also very much about getting away from our head, because it's not about theories. It's not about being able to explain things perfectly, but it's very much about being able to really connect with ourselves, inside ourselves, with things that really matter, and that we really feel like, yeah, this is really meaningful, or it's not meaningful. And so this can also include things that are, people know nowadays, that are quite popular, things like mindfulness or meditation. These are all different ways how we can actually focus more on our experiences, and that really also uncovers some of those deeper layers inside ourselves. And in that sense, I think that a lot of non-Western cultures, particularly also things like Buddhism, Hinduism, that they have a lot of rich techniques and skills how to go there actually in a phenomenological way.
Interesting. Now, are there any other ways people can uncover more meaning in life? Like when you're working with a client, are there any questions that you find particularly helpful to help them uncover more meaning, or any questions that you regularly ask yourself to, get back in touch with that core essence?
Yeah, there are many different ways. But often it starts with, just a gut feeling, like I don't know what it is, but I'm just not living life to the full. Like it's that feeling like a little bit of discomfort. And quite often it's not really big, but it's just not happy. I'm not happy with myself. And take those feelings serious, because that can be actually our intuition that is calling to ourselves, because we feel that we're not really ourselves. So ourself is starting to knock on the door of ourself, and to really start listening at those moments. And already at quite an early stage, when we feel like, I'm not sure what I'm doing, whether I'm at the right place, start exploring and take it serious, and that's okay. And but it's also about listening also to our positive intuition, to listen to those moments that, things that you're looking forward to, where you feel that your body is getting its energy from, where you feel alive. And so one of the things that I often ask people to do is, as a kind of a homework, at the end of each day, write down the moments during the day that felt the most meaningful. Because quite often we don't think about things that are meaningful, but actually, like when you start to really take some time and dedicate it, suddenly you start to think, wow, there's so much meaning around. It's everywhere. So one of those exercises is also that I ask people to sit in their room and just look around all the objects they have in the room, and the stories that the objects tell, and the meaning that the objects have for them. I find it important, for instance. That's also why I have a lot of stuff here behind me, like memories about good moments in my life, books that matter, a painting that matters to me, and all of us do that already intuitively, that we surround ourselves by meaningful things. Only usually we're not aware of it. And by actually making it explicit, giving it words and focusing on it, can suddenly make us feel, wow, I'm actually already living a much more meaningful life than I thought that I was living. And so quite often it's more also like opening our eyes for what is already meaningful.
That's super interesting. Now, something else I noticed from your work, Joel, is you talk about, the difference between having one source of meaning and multiple sources of meaning. And, what is the danger of just having like one source of meaning? Like I myself, I run a business, and for a long time, I just had this like one thing I was focused on. And I'm like, if that's going well, like it's great, like life's fantastic. But then if you're having like a bad week or a bad month or whatever, then that's a big source of meaning for you that's down, so there's a danger in that. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about that there?
Well, you've already explained it with your example there. So there's little I can add to that, but okay, I will try then. Because indeed, when you focus so much on just one thing, then, and if like your happiness and your sense of life satisfaction, when it all depends on that one thing, and that one thing is not going that well, suddenly your life feels, as if it's collapsing, as if it's not worth living anymore even. So I've seen that actually quite often when I particularly worked with people from the city of London, where, for instance, people lost their job. And their job had been everything before that, because they had done like an MBA or like an economics degree, and after that they tried to get the highest position in the field, etc., and they were able to do so. Well, then unfortunately, possibly due to the economic developments, they actually lost their jobs. But suddenly that it wasn't only losing a job, but also losing the only sense of meaning in life. So then I had to help them to find some new meaning in life. And when you only have one meaning in life and that one falls away, then you become in a huge crisis. And then people may even start to become doubting whether they want to continue living. So people could become suicidal. So therefore, it's usually important to have multiple sources of meaning, also at different hierarchies. Obviously, that certain things are more important than others, but so you have always something else to fall back on. So there's some therapists in my field who say, as a rule of thumb, that people should have like 4 or 5 really meaningful parts in their lives. So for instance, like that you have friends who are important, your family that's important, and your job that's important. But you could also have, for instance, also like a hobby of like going to a soccer match, for instance. Like, so then you have multiple meanings that are really important. And but also it also needs some continued investment. So when you have those multiple aspects in your life that's meaningful, make sure that you have enough time and energy to dedicate to all of them. Because that will really help you. When you are narrowly focused on only one thing, you're more vulnerable, you're not so resilient, but also life will feel more boring in the sense, even if it's very meaningful, it will become more boring if it's only one thing.
100%. It's like, I forgot what I was going to say here. Oh yeah, no, I'm just going to say about your framework, you know, these six different types of meaning. That is such a powerful lens to look at your life through, because it allows you to diversify your sources of meaning and
absolutely
opens up more sources. But what I want to ask you about now, Joel, is, you know, what you've experienced all these different cultures. You know, you've traveled. I think you've spent time in indigenous cultures as well. You've spoken a bit about the universals, but what would you say the biggest barriers to meaning are in our own culture? Like, what are the biggest problems that are preventing people from living a meaningful life in our culture?
So, yeah, 2 things come to mind. One is politics, and 2 is economics. And both are totally intertwined, obviously. So what I mean by politics is there's so many decisions that governments have made for us, and which already push us in a certain direction in our society. For instance, like when you look at your curriculum at schools, it's so focused on the main skills that we need for a job. But like, for instance, even several decades ago at schools, people were taught much more about other things that are important for living. And it's also topics like art, humanities. So what we really see is that society, how it's organized nowadays, it really pushes towards those materialistic types of meaning and thinking that life and that the meaning of life, living a good life, that it is about being successful in your job or in your career. Whereas actually it's very rare that people will really be able to find a full, meaningful life only in a career. It can absolutely add to it. Oh, absolutely. But quite often it's much more. So there have been a lot of political decisions that have been focused very much on that. And that has been stimulated also by some economic forces. I've already mentioned how we see that in capitalistic countries, people are more materialistic, hedonistic, and self-oriented, and how that's associated with a worse mental and physical well-being. But in that sense, like what happens is like, for instance, on an average day, we see more than 4,000 advertisements or logos. So we are being nudged all the time. All the time, we have all those influence on us that are telling what's important on a very subliminal, on a very subtle level that we're even not aware of. But all the time, we are being pushed in certain directions. Because that's, of course, what companies want. They want to sell the products. But the problem is like, whereas actually like we get so much of the information from a very young age onwards on, but actually, yeah, we get much more manipulated in those directions. And it's much more difficult to really go back to yourself and ask yourself what's truly meaningful, because there's all those tiny manipulations all the time. And that's a big question that we need to start to ask ourselves very explicitly, like, okay, let's stop. And what's truly meaningful for us as a society? Where do we really want to go to? And I dare to say that at this moment, we are at a moment in the history of economics, of politics. And I think in future generations, we'll really look at our moment as like a change point. That's very much what I feel. Because we already see that the economy is changing. Because we are already starting to become much more oriented towards meaning, like a meaning-oriented economy. So that's actually also what the World Economic Forum was actually saying in Davos early 2020, that they were saying that we need to have a reset of our economic ways of thinking, where we include like also the ecology, nature, but also equality, equity of people, etc. So, and even so, all those big economists, even they are saying, well, we need to have a different focus. And it's not only like a theory that that's happening, it is already happening, because we already see that much bigger percentages of or bigger proportions of the economy are being spent much more on what's meaningful for people. So I often give the example of, you can buy your loaf of bread in the supermarket, where actually the money will go somewhere to a big boss of the multinational who is running the supermarket. Or instead, you go to your local baker, and where you know the baker personally and his family, you know that the bread itself, it's good for nature, it's ecological, etc. So buying the loaf of bread from your local baker makes a difference. It is meaningful because it includes, you know, the social aspect, the social type of meaning of like connecting with the baker. It's a larger type of meaning. It's about thinking about nature, etc. And many more of our decisions nowadays, our decisions in society and economy, are much more being influenced by what we feel is truly meaningful, and values are becoming much more important when we think about the economy. And so in that sense, we live in a very interesting times, and particularly now that this development has been further stimulated also by the COVID-19 crisis, because that is like a very hard reset button for our economy, where a lot of people have lost their jobs, or the jobs has changed in nature, that people start to also work from the homes. People have to rethink about themselves, what's truly important for me. So what we really see is that we are on a collective scale, worldwide scale, in a transition in the economy. And that is one of the things that I find very fascinating. So where on the one hand, there are all those hindrances of the politics, of the economics, but at the same time, that's all at this moment in a change. And of course, we are now at this moment like in a battle, in a fight, because there's still all the market forces and all the more materialistic perspectives, which are still there. And also with governments really impose a lot of their own rules, or where governments have been using the COVID-19 crisis to actually fund some of the big multinationals to rescue them, whereas at the same time the salaries for the nurses get frozen. I'm just exaggerating here, but what you really see is, yes, we are in a position of change, but the struggle is not over in that sense. But yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Now, Joel, just a couple of questions to finish up.
Yep.
What are you finding most meaningful in your own life right now?
What I find most meaningful, well, actually, that's it. Just being able to share my expertise, talking with you, and hopefully that I can inspire some people, I can make people reflect and think. That makes real sense for me. Particularly now during the lockdown, during COVID-19. So what I've seen is now during the COVID-19 crisis that quite a lot of people, they actually became almost like in a depressive type of mode, where they mainly were like binge watching television all the time with all the series. And although I also watch series, no, absolutely, but my initial response was and still is to really start focus on what's truly meaningful. What can I really do to help other people? So I've started those mental health groups, which is called Mental Health for All. And these are groups where we have weekly meetings on the Wednesday evening to really be with each other and share with each other about how can we still live a meaningful and satisfying life, even now during the lockdown, during all the changes of society that we're in. So that's one of the things I've been doing. I've been doing lots of research on COVID-19. And I've been running my International Meaning Conferences, which are very big conferences all around meaning. And this year I've done it totally online for the first time. So these are all things where I focus on some larger types of meaning, where I hope to help to create a better world. I know I'm very ambitious and possibly even a bit narcissistic, thinking that I can do that, but hey, it's worth a try. It's worth a try, and it gives me a sense of fulfillment of at least trying to make the world a slightly better place.
Well, why not? And you know, you're a perfect example of somebody who's walking your talk, because you've taken a very potentially bad situation and you've turned it into something very meaningful through the book that you're writing, through your mental health for all groups. You know, you've essentially just everything that you teach, you are doing, which is powerful, Joel. So I want to commend you for that. And just a final question. Where can people find you online? And is there anywhere you'd like to send people to check out online while you have us here?
Yeah, I should have prepared a very good PR speech beforehand, I know. So unfortunately, I didn't do that. That's always a bit I always forget. I'm always thinking about what's meaningful, and then I forget that bit. But well, people can go to joelvos.com. That is my own private website. If you want to know more about me as a person. But if you're more interested in the group's Mental Health for All, that's mentalhealthforall.org, and that's a figure 4. And if you're interested more in conferences, a bit more in the scientific aspect, that is meaning.org.uk. Unfortunately, when people see this, then actually our conference of 2020 has already passed, but people can still see some of those lectures of us online when they go to meaning.org.uk.
I hope in 2021 we can do it as a live event again. I was at the 2019 International Meaning Conference and it was an amazing experience. Just the people you meet there and the times you have, it's a really special event. So anyone's listening to that and it's interested in the subject, I highly recommend checking out the 2021 International Meaning Conference. So Joel, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. I really appreciate it, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you very much.